The interesting thing about building AI applications nowadays, particularly ones that rely on large language models, is that the AI piece, in some sense, is now trivial. So there's not a tremendous amount of value anymore from saying like, hey, we're going to do this magical stuff with natural language, because you can just do it yourself in ChatGPT. Where I see the real value is in the collaboration.
Hey everyone, it's John Adams. Welcome back to the Process Lab podcast, the show where we tackle common business problems and provide insight for operational excellence. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the RFP process, and we're very fortunate to be joined by an expert in the area and someone who has a solution for all of you, Peter Bonney. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, John. Pleasure to be here.
So, Peter, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to find yourself wanting to solve this problem, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly didn't happen, from childhood. This has been an interesting journey, and really, it sounds a little bit strange to say, but solving RFP problems and kind of maybe the broader challenge of buyer-seller engagement in kind of complex B2B transactions has really been my focus for the last 9 years now across 2 different companies. And like I said, it's not really what I set out to do with my life. So it is an interesting journey. Before I started a software company, I spent most of my career in investment management. And one of the interesting things about it was my focus. Well, I did a lot of different things over time, but for a long period of time, I focused a lot on early stage mining companies. And an early stage mining company is kind of just a vehicle for raising money and then spending it all through a couple of really, really massive RFPs. Because, it's really just sort of a, until you actually build the mine, it's just kind of an idea. You've got some data, you've got some maps, you've got some analysis. And you're going to raise money and you're going to go out and you're going to hire a couple of critical suppliers to build the mine. And you're betting the farm on those supplier relationships working out. So I saw that go wrong a whole bunch of times over the course of my career. And I just thought, man, like this looks like a really complex business problem. How do you actually do these kind of really complex transactions? Like you go out, you get quotes, you ask for a bunch of information. Is that the best you can do? And so solving that and making it better it's been my focus really for the last 9 years.
Sorry, Peter, just a quick question. Please. Are there other examples of companies that start without the capability? Well, I guess we'll start without the capability to do anything, but without even knowing if they can do the thing. Like that was fascinating to me, that mining, I know it's a little off topic, but that mining starts with somebody having absolutely nothing but an idea that I'm going to mine for something.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say they have absolutely nothing. So actually, you're really, now you're digging in deep in my memory banks. A pretty common occurrence with startup mines is that they're actually starting up mines that used to operate a long time ago, or that are like kind of expansions of mines that operated a long time ago. And so there's data, there's like old information, there's new kind of holes they've drilled that sort of prove out the idea of it and what they think is there. But yeah, you're speculating for sure. Like until you actually, dig that mine, like you don't know if those test holes are going to map exactly to the geology, and, you don't know exactly what the recovery process is going to be. It is complicated. And there are a lot of mines that have gone wrong, kind of going from like kind of data to actual production.
Including because they couldn't get their act together fast enough through the RFP process.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. The cost overruns, things didn't go right. They picked the wrong partner. They optimized for cost rather than quality. Like, yeah, it's all sorts of things can go wrong in the process.
So then fast forward. So now we're past the mining. So the maybe just take us through some of the problems with the RFP process. I'm sure it's visceral for a lot of people involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. Like I guess I am now an expert on the RFP process. I did not, like I said, I did not start there, but now this is my second software company that has been involved in RFPs in one way or another. And the first one, we made a product that actually helped people issue RFPs. So we sold to procurement teams to run sourcing events, to manage their suppliers. And, the thing that I always said when we were starting that company was that, like, the RFP is the worst solution that people have come up with for running these complex buying processes, except for every other solution, right? Like, it's a real solution to a problem, and everybody agrees that it's imperfect. Imperfect is probably being generous, right? It's a real challenge on both the buy side and the sell side. By the way, it's not just sellers who struggle with it, but people have yet to come up with a significantly better approach for handling a complex purchase, with high dollar values at a large organization. And I've got a vision for what that future might look like. And I've now started 2 companies to try and put that vision into reality. But both times, it turns out like there's so much to kind of unpack with the existing RFP process that, like, it's hard not to get sucked into just making the RFP process better,
And just take us through some of those problems.
Sure. So let's look. I'll start with the sell side because it's sort of it's the one I'm currently focused on, and it's sort of the most obvious. But I want to talk about some of the buyer side problems as well, because it's the buyers aren't setting out to make life difficult for sellers. They've got real issues that they're trying to deal with. So on the seller side, the biggest challenge with an RFP is that it is contrary to every best practice of modern sales that people talk about, right? Like, there's very, very little customer engagement. I mean, if you get invited to an RFP for a customer you don't have a relationship with, your first engagement with them might be receiving this email saying, hey, you're invited to participate in this RFP process. And by the way, I'm not even talking about government RFPs. Like, I'm just talking about commercial.
Yeah, in the corporate world, it's sometimes the primary way of acquisition. Of business, so.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so like, that's very much at odds with how sales organizations want to engage with customers and want to sell their product, and how they're built to do it, unless they really are like a government contractor. So the first problem is it just breaks your sales process, right? This is just not how organizations are set up to sell. The second problem is that, depending on like how repetitive these RFPs are for your organization, like, you may or may not have a good library of content to draw from to respond to each new one. And that means even if your library is pretty good, you're going to have to go out to subject matter experts inside your company to possibly, help you write the whole thing, but at a minimum review what you've produced. And I'm saying you as like the salesperson or the proposal manager, whoever is in charge of producing the document. And here's the thing with subject matter experts, right? We call them subject matter experts as if that's their job. That is not their job, right? Subject matter expert is a euphemism for somebody who has some job in the company that is not responding to RFPs, right? Like, if you're subject matter expert on cybersecurity, their job is keeping your business's, data safe, right? And keep your systems safe and compliant. So when they get brought in as a subject matter expert, that is taking them away from their day job. That's a real cost to your company. And either, it's costing your company money because they're not doing their job and somebody else needs to do it, or it's putting your company at risk because nobody's doing the job while they're responding to the RFP. So, like, that's the sort of biggest problem that companies face in responding to large scale RFPs, is that there's a whole lot of people that have to get involved that, it's really not their job to do it, and they're not set up to do it. And that's really kind of what we're trying to solve, is this kind of scaling of expertise and giving access to the knowledge that those people possess by kind of doing it one time and taking everything that they've ever written in response to an RFP or elsewhere, so that they don't have to repeat themselves and take themselves away from those important jobs they're doing. Does that make sense?
It does. So the AI aspect of it, and I know you didn't mention that, but it's on your site. It's taking, or whatever the process is, it's taking any information that's already been used for an RFP and then trying to deploy it for the specific way the question might be asked in a new RFP.
Yeah, that's the simplest case, and it could be information that as you said, is from past RFPs, but could also just be general documentation or marketing materials or technical materials, whatever content your company has that's relevant, right? Because I hate to say the dirty secret, but like the thing that nobody really talks about with RFPs is that I don't care how sophisticated your response process is, what everybody does, every single organization in the world does in response to an RFP is they look at what they've said in the past, they copy, they paste, they edit. That's it. Like that is the process of responding to an RFP, like at the most sophisticated organizations. And so, that is something that AI is actually very well geared to do, to simplify that initial drafting process. Like, why go through this search, copy, paste, edit process when you can automate that and come in at a much sort of, much further down the process and add your expertise there and make much better use of your time.
Does it help with the problem of companies suddenly having a new capability that they never had before because there's a question, in the RFP, and so suddenly now they're experts in this area too? And I ask that, half jokingly, half not, but that's a common problem.
Well, okay. Let's maybe not put such a cynical spin on it. I will say that compliance analysis and capabilities analysis is certainly part of it, right? And any good system, there's a number of systems that are in this space, and they ought to be able to tell you what you have information on and what you don't, right? So we've invested a lot of time in making sure that our model does not invent things out of thin air. And so, we would much rather say nothing, right? That if you can't answer a question, if there's something, somebody asks you about, I don't know, data domicile in Europe, and your business is entirely based in the US and all of your servers are based in the US, and there's no information about Europe at all, like we would rather not answer and make it clear to you, hey, there's no answer here. Like you've got to come up with something.
Well,
you don't have an answer.
I can tell you what the answer at a minimum always is. It's on our roadmap.
Well, hey, there you go. That's I'm going to add that to my roadmap. Like it's not no answer. It's on our roadmap. It's good.
But, and so just flipping ahead, although I have more questions on the buyer side, to the seller side, just so that people start seeing the nuance on both. So you mentioned some of the problems there and what this helps with.
Yeah. So, I think buyers get a bad rap because, look, if you're a seller and you get this, 500 or even 1,000 questionnaire from some buyer that you don't have a relationship with, it can feel like they're not treating you seriously. And I think there is this kind of longstanding reputation that if you didn't help write the RFP, that means one of your competitors did. And so I think there's this, there's this term column fodder, right? Where they're like, well, hey, look, if we weren't involved in writing this RFP, then we're just being brought in, so that they can add more columns to the spreadsheet and say that, hey, they got 3 or 5 competitive bids or whatever, and they're going to go with the person they want to go with. And that's really not true. Like,
that's my experience is even companies that might sit out with an intention to validate something, end up seeing something they didn't know was there, and it could change the whole ballgame. So
yeah, and look, the other thing is that I think what a lot of sellers don't appreciate is that procurement professionals take their job extremely seriously. I've now had the privilege of meeting a lot of people in procurement, by virtue of our, my first company, Vendorful, and they are all very, very professional, very serious about what they do, and to the extent they've had to in the past lean on suppliers to help provide them with the information to buy stuff, It's because they're tasked with something impossible. They're supposed to be the subject matter experts for buying stuff in every domain that the company buys, right? Like you might have a single IT buyer and this IT buyer is tasked with buying everything ranging from computers to like DNS to InfoSec products to now AI products. It's not reasonable to expect that they're going to be a subject matter expert on all of those things. So, of course, they have to lean on actual subject matter experts. In the past, excuse me, in the past, that would mean going to suppliers, right? Because, say what you want about suppliers and the bias in RFP templates, they at least know their own products and they know their domains. Nowadays, though, like, hey, ChatGPT is actually very, very good at doing that. So every person I know in procurement, when they don't know something, they're no longer going to suppliers to ask them for an RFP template. They're going to ChatGPT and saying, hey, give me 50 questions about this topic. Give me 100 questions about that topic. And so I think this kind of old guidance about like, hey, if we didn't write the RFP, that means our competitor did. Not true. Nowadays, if you didn't write the RFP, most likely ChatGPT did.
And so how does your solution help with from the buyer side?
Well, so our current solution doesn't really, well, it does in one sense. The thing that people don't really want to talk about that much with AI is that there's a lot of data that shows, it's more accurate than humans at answering questions. And there's a lot of concern about hallucinations and AI generated content, but its recall of factual information is better than people's. And so if you are using AI if a seller is using AI to come up with a draft of an RFP response, it's very likely that that draft is going to be more accurate than if a person on their team did it. And there's going to be fewer errors and more accurate information. We've actually seen RFPs where the buyer seems to be concerned that it might be answered by AI, like they don't want it to be answered by AI. And I think that's completely backwards. Like, I think as much as possible, you want to remove humans from the kind of fact regurgitation business, right? Because we're not good at regurgitating facts. Computers are good at regurgitating facts. So I think as much as possible, if you're a buyer, you want accurate information. Like you want that RFP to be filled out correctly. So it benefits buyers that sellers can produce accurate drafts very quickly. But that aside, my first company, Vendorful, was all focused on improving the process of selecting suppliers and managing suppliers, including running RFPs. And buyers face very similar challenges with subject matter experts internally. And the difference is that if you are a selling organization, you might get a lot of these RFPs and your subject matter experts internally are getting kind of annoyed that like, oh God, I've got to answer another one of these RFPs. If you're a buyer organization, you're buying a product, you might buy that product once a year, maybe once every 5 years. If you're talking about software and you're going to sort of sign up for a multi-year contract. And so you don't have the internal chops to kind of do this over and over again. You're having to reinvent the wheel every single time, right? And I think that's one reason sellers get annoyed is every one of these RFPs looks a little bit different, but it's because there's no sharing of expertise across companies on the buy side. And I think there really should be. But I think competitive pressures prevent that. And so
can you imagine the future? I mean, there always is the tension of the buyer wants to know just the facts, and then the seller is trying to, let's say, put nuance on it to put their best foot forward. Can you imagine a future where a solution like yours helps bring the disparity a little bit more in line with one another?
Yes. So this has really been my vision for the last 9 years. The one common theme on both sides of this divide, you've got this buyer-seller divide, and both of them kind of hate the RFP process. And the one thing that they agree on is they're too long. There's too much information that needs to be exchanged. And me looking at it as an outside observer and just seeing what goes back and forth between these two different these two different communities, most of that information is pretty rote. It's stuff that it's check the box information. And I don't mean that in a negative way. They're important boxes to check, right? Like, yes, you need to make sure that, the thing you're buying as a buyer is, compliant with data privacy regulations and so on and so forth. And as a seller, like, yeah, you want to convey that information, but that's not what's going to make or break the deal. It's not what's going to differentiate the product from either a buyer's perspective or a seller's perspective. And so where I think this is all going, or at least should be going, is reducing the scope of information that is actually exchanged between the humans, right? Using AI on both sides to take that like 90% of kind of check the box information and just like letting the computers like check those boxes, right? And say like, hey, like we gotta, we as buyers gotta confirm that you meet all these check boxes. And then the seller saying like, yes, actually this computer can confirm that we meet all those check boxes. And then these other bits, this other information, the stuff that's actually differentiated. This is, as a buyer, this is something specific about my business that I need you to address. And as a seller, oh, hey, I see that you have this specific need, and that's our expertise, or that's where we can really shine, like, and focusing in on that and the value you're going to get from our product. Like, that's where both sides want to focus, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that machines can really, really help focus both buyers and sellers on the things that matter and kind of like cross this chasm, if you will.
But if there was like some sort of API or, an RFP or API or something, the challenge, I guess, is still the data. Like having the data mean the same thing across, every entity. They'd all have to adhere to a standard of some sort, which marketing would not be happy with, because nobody wants to. Effectively, it commoditizes people.
Well, so this is what's interesting about large language models, right? So look, if we were having this conversation in 2016, the pitch that I would have given you then is, hey, what Venderful's trying to do is sort of build this marketplace so that we can build that API, right? And we ended up not building that API. What we ended up building was a procurement software solution that helped people be more efficient about procurement, because this idea of being the knowledge API for all complex purchases, it's way too big. It's like you said, that's too much for anybody to bite off. It's just not feasible. But the interesting thing in a post-ChatGPT world is that the English language or natural language, and in any of any tongue, is essentially the de facto API language, right? And it creates that capability for systems which don't share an API to communicate in English or in French. And it's a little bizarre. Like if I could travel back in time and tell my 2016 self, like, oh yeah, this is going to happen someday, but it's going to be by like computers just speaking to each other in English, I would have said that's ridiculous. That is so dumb. What are you talking about? But now that we're kind of in that world, I'm like, oh, actually, it kind of makes sense. Yeah.
They'd still have to be behind it, though. The AI would have to access inside the entity.
Yes. So I think the real challenge or the real hurdle that buyers need to overcome that would really help them would be the sharing of knowledge across companies, right? Like I think there's just so much taboo around this idea that like, the information that we use to make business decisions is proprietary to us. We cannot share it with our competitors. I get it when you're talking about your products. When you're talking about buying stuff, like I just think that that's an area where companies could really benefit from sharing a lot more information with each other.
I don't disagree. I think the pushback, and I think if your entities are too worried about information getting out, probably need to reassess their business model, because they're probably going to be in trouble eventually. But the problem is a well-done RFP can extract your roadmap. It can extract, like your intention, let's say. And some entities are, without confidentiality, would be hesitant to overly share.
That is true. But I guess, there's a threshold, right? If you're talking about a multi-million-dollar purchase, if you're talking about buying an ERP system, which you're going to invest, 8 figures in, and you're going to invest possibly years of implementation time, undoubtedly that is going to touch on critical, confidential business information around, your strategy and what your goals are. If you're talking about a $50,000 purchase where you've got to go out to bid because your finance requirements demand that, you get 3 competitive bids, like, is that really strategic to your business? Is there really proprietary information in there? And if so, could you rewrite it so maybe there was a little less proprietary information? Like, I just, not every single purchase that meets a finance threshold meets a kind of like strategic importance threshold.
But maybe that's where there's still room for a standard, even in this era, is
Sure.
like defining the 80% or whatever percent that can we all just agree, this is all pain for all of us, like this data. So let's get access to it. What else does it help with, the tool, or where you're going with the tool? What does that help with internally? Like, I remember sequencing, like somebody couldn't do their part until someone else did their part, et cetera. Does it help with that?
Yeah. So, what the interesting thing about building AI applications nowadays, particularly ones that rely on large language models, is that the AI piece in some sense is now trivial. So there's not a tremendous amount of value anymore from saying like, hey, we're going to do this magical stuff with natural language, because you can just do it yourself in ChatGPT. Where I see the real value is in the collaboration, like as you were starting to allude to there, like, hey, we've got this complex process that we need to manage. And even with AI, right, like it still needs to touch all the different experts inside our organization. It's got to get executive approval. It's got to get compliance approval, legal approval. Sales needs to review it. We want our, proposal managers and marketing people to kind of jazz up the language. Like, it's going to go through all of those steps. Whether or not you've got AI drafting it, you're never just going to take the AI thing and just send it out. Like, never. I don't see that happening, at least not for the next 5 years. And so to me, yeah, most of the value in the software, and this is a bit different than what I imagined when we started the company, most of the value comes from that collaboration piece and from that human engagement and kind of helping manage the flow of that information so that people are able to do the things they need to do and ignore the things that they don't need to do. Does that make sense?
You give an idea of how you go about that? Like,
yeah. So like, okay. So like one of our customers is actually a health insurance provider. I'm under NDA, so I can't name them, but you know the name. And a typical RFP for them might touch as many as 50 different subject matter experts. And for regulatory and compliance reasons, even if the knowledge, of those experts is mostly contained in their content now, and the AI is mostly accessing that, those subject matter experts still need to review it, because they're not sending that thing out the door until like an actual human has signed off and said, yes, this particular piece of information about claims or about, this particular medical procedure and how we approach it, like that's accurate and is up to date. So what our system does is it produces the draft. You upload an RFP and it produces the draft drawn from the correct content. And then the project manager, the proposal manager, can assign it to specific groups. They don't even need to assign it to individuals. Like we've got, kind of groups set up internally that they can create. So, this is going to go to claims. This is going to go to legal. This is going to go to, health analytics, right? And this is going to go to medical, whatever it is. And then a person inside that organization can kind of pick up on it, right? And if it maybe has to go to 2 different parts of the organization, it has to go to claims and analytics. And so, we are able to track that, like someone in claims has approved it, someone in analytics has made an edit. Now it needs to go back to claims, right? And they've got to approve on the change. And then it goes back up to the person who assigned it in the first place, and sort of tracking that. So it's like as easy as possible. Like they're doing that over email today, and it's really just terrible, right? Like it's impossible to keep track of. Computers are very, very good at that stuff. Even without AI, but AI helps a lot too. And so, simplifying those workflows, from what we've seen, is the biggest benefit that the subject matter experts feel, is that like, oh, hey, like this is like, it's great that it's produced a draft, But the biggest thing is like, I'm not having to like, people aren't chasing me and emailing me 50 times, and I'm not on these like weird email threads that are irrelevant to me. Like, I do exactly what I need to do, and it's clear.
And that more people can have a picture of where it's at, like
Totally.
So the status wasn't always. Does it help at all? And I don't know how it would, but with the oral presentation, if there is one, in an RFP process.
Not today. That's interesting, but no, we're not going anywhere near that problem. But that's an interesting one to think about.
Yeah. Well, maybe even the materials for it. Like it's very similar preparing for the oral presentation is very similar to the RFP process. Only now it's like you're in litigation where you already now set up some facts. So
yes.
You can't suddenly change all those facts.
I mean, I guess it helps in that sense that you've got a definitive document. And I guess maybe in contrast to just working out of Excel or Word, maybe Word, but in contrast to working out of Excel, like you've got we track the whole history of how everything has changed. So you can see not just what you said, but what you didn't say, like maybe we're thinking about saying. So I suppose in that sense, it's helpful. But I'll be honest, I haven't heard about our customers using it for that kind of preparation. But actually now I'm going to actually go ask and see if any of them are.
Yeah, my experience was very similar. Like it was depending on how many different meetings or presentations there were, each one was a mini RFP, to do all over again. So, okay, so we're coming toward the end of our time here. Is there any suggestion you have for a company who's faced with an RFP and like how they should conceptualize it maybe differently than they do right now? And I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, well, okay. So, I mean, I'll divide the world up into two very, very coarse buckets. If you are getting started in responding to RFPs, you're a relatively small business selling to large companies for the first time, or you're expanding to large buyers for the first time. There is unfortunately no shortcut to just doing a good RFP response the first time. Like AI is not going to help you really if you've never done it. Like you've got to have the content.
And AI also can't tell you what your company is. Like I've seen companies who don't know, who actually don't understand what their distinguishing characteristics are.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So like you do have to understand yourself. Like AI tools can only help you if you understand yourself. Like you're spot on. So like I'll set that bucket aside because we do get inquiries from people. It's like, hey, we never responded to an RFP. Can your tool do it for us? The answer is no. Well, I mean, sort of if you've got relevant content that we can turn into the RFP response. But if you don't have it, then no, the AI can't just make it up. So that's one bucket. For mature organizations or organizations that are, let's say, more mature in their RFP response process, I would say that like forget software for a second. Just I think organizations need to adapt to this new reality where buyers are running more stuff through RFP. We see that the threshold for running RFPs is getting lower and lower in terms of dollar values. The RFPs are getting longer because it's so much easier to produce RFP content thanks to ChatGPT. And they're getting more frequent, even things that, renewals, right? That they might have just sort of had like a discussion about, contract renegotiation and contract terms. They're now running it through RFP again, every year. So selling organizations need to accept that. That's not going away anytime soon. Like the era of kind of cheap money seems to be behind us, and organizations are taking their spend very, very seriously. So look, whether you invest in tools or you just invest in process, you need to spend some time seriously thinking about how you are responding to RFPs. It's no longer going to be good enough to say, you know what, we don't respond to RFPs. Like that's just what we do. Because you're going to give up business that way.
Excellent. Well, Peter, thanks for going over this, what is normally a painful process, but I think a process that if it results in a lot of new business could be a key to a lot of company success if they get it right. So,
totally.
So I think it's important on both ends. But
yeah, in fact, you know what? Actually, like if I can just throw in one little point on what you just said there, like the businesses that are embracing this as an opportunity, that this is the new reality, and we can win business if we're a little better at responding to RFPs than our peers, they are succeeding at it.
And on that note, again, Peter, thanks for joining us today. And to our fans listening, please like and subscribe and share the episode with others. And please let us know what you think in the comments.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Peter.